Hey friends, thanks for joining me and Vasilina Valchanova for the second day of the BFCM Prepathon. And before we dive into the presentation today about the Jobs to be Done framework, I have a little announcement to make from Cloudways, which is that you can win Amazon gift cards, you can win consultancy, WordPress, Cloudways hosting credits, free tools, and a lot more in the first comment that we pinned below this video. So definitely check out that amazing giveaway, because there is a lot of value that you can get out of just that giveaway. But also, of course, stick with us. Shoot your questions at us during the presentation. We want to make this as engaging as possible. And Vasi has a presentation for us today that I am super excited, because I'm also a nerd for the Jobs to be Done framework. So let me bring up her slides. We're going to full screen. Vasi, it's your stage. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jan. Thank you so much for the intro, and a huge thank you to Cloudways for giving me the opportunity to talk about something I'm super passionate about, which is the Jobs to be Done framework. I'm going to share with you what it is. If you have never heard about it, this is the right session for you, so you will learn the basics. If you have heard about it and you're happy with testing it out and seeing what it can do for you, this is also the right session for you, because we'll go into the step-by-step process that I use when doing Jobs to be Done research with my clients. So I'm gonna dive right in. First, I just want to quickly present who I am and where you can learn more. My name is Vasilena, as Jan so eloquently mentioned at the start, but everyone calls me Vasi, so you can do the same. And what I do is I do freelance consulting for digital first brands, and what I help them with is making sure that they establish a real life efficient connection with their audiences that can win the hearts and minds of their audience and spur those people into action. So if you want to learn more, you see here my website. I'd also love to connect with you on social media. I'm everywhere on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and I'm sure that if you just type in my family name, which you can see here on the slide, there won't be a lot of people to go through the list and choose the right one. So you'll be more than ready to click there and start a conversation with me. So we're talking about Jobs to be Done, which is, as I mentioned, frankly, my favorite framework for doing customer research. And it's a way for you, as we mentioned in the title of this talk, for you to stand out from the competition and make sure that people really value your brand more than anyone else's, than all of the other people they can click through and go to for their needs. And especially when it comes to e-commerce shops, which I'm going to tell you more about in a second. But first, a really quick intro in what the hell we're talking about. What is Jobs to be Done? So there's this really simple way of explaining what Jobs to be Done is, although it's a more complicated concept that I'll get into in a bit. But really high level, what we're talking about here is that in general, we always focus on the product. We think about, okay, like, what am I selling? What's the product like? What are the physical or technical dimensions? What are the different features that it has? What's the price point? What's the packaging, etc., etc. But people don't necessarily pay attention to that as much as the use of the product. So we've all heard about selling benefits rather than features, right? So we know that people are interested in the use of the product, what the product can do for them, rather than what the product actually is. But where Jobs to be Done differs is it goes a step further and talks about the actual outcome. So if you're like the classic example, which is why we have these power tools here on the slide, is that you don't necessarily look for a 1/4 inch drill, you're looking for a 1/4 inch hole in the wall. But according to jobs to be done, you're not even looking for that. You're looking for a way to personalize your home, which is why you need that hole in the wall in the first place to put up a picture. So at the very basis, jobs to be done is about reaching that outcome and communicating that outcome rather than the basics of the product itself. And you might be wondering, why are we talking about this in an event that's focused on Black Friday and Cyber Monday preparations? And especially when we're talking about the e-commerce industry in particular. And I have a hot take on this. I think that when we're in e-commerce, what usually happens is that more often than not, we'll be selling the same products as our competitors. So we won't be really able to differentiate on the product side. We might do some fancy copywriting work which highlights the use better than competitors. So we'll be able to showcase that product better than others. But what can really make us stand out and make our brand stand out is helping clients get to this outcome in the most efficient way through selling them the original product, but also giving them all of the other elements that they're interested in, which includes fast customer service, which might include assembly of different products or post-purchase consultations or whatever it is. But we need to be mindful that we're not just selling them product A, we're selling them that dream outcome that they came to us for, that they came to get at. And my whole thesis here is that the better you understand what that dream outcome is and what your customers want to achieve, the more successful you'll be at communicating that, which improves the recognition of your brand and the way you're differentiating yourself from competitors. So this is why jobs to be done, a framework that's usually used a lot by product companies, can be very useful for e-commerce as well. So there's a bit of a different take on jobs to be done. So you'll find a lot of different research out there, and there's a differentiations that I want to highlight here and point you in the right direction. So there's two schools of thought in jobs to be done. One is looking at what we call jobs as activities. So one of the first researchers who promoted jobs to be done as a concept define it as a task, goal, or objective that the person is trying to accomplish, or a product that they are trying to resolve. So here we're talking about more of like a functional, more utilitarian approach to jobs to be done. To me, this can be useful, for example, in user research, in improving customer experience, in improving customer support, but it's not necessarily as interesting from a branding standpoint or from a marketing strategy standpoint, let's say. So what I want to direct your thinking to is thinking about jobs as progress. So this is the other school of thought when it comes to jobs to be done, which was first set up by one of the most famous scholars of jobs to be done out there, Clay Christensen, and also promoted by a lot of others. But I think this is a nice summary of it. So a job to be done is the process a customer goes through whenever they aim to transform their life situation. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you'll only be talking about like pride and confidence and all of these elements, but it still means that you need to go beyond the actual functional use of a product in order to really understand jobs to be done. So what we're looking at here between jobs as activities and jobs as progress is a very big difference in how you're going to approach jobs to be done. And my approach goes in the latter camp. I'm interested when I'm doing marketing strategy, when I'm doing messaging strategy, I'm interested in the progress that the customer wants to achieve, because this is where your message can really resonate. So if you think about it in more practical terms, First off, let me say no one looks that happy as these two guys when mowing the lawn. I mean, like, that's just fiction, clearly, and stock image fiction at that, which is the worst, but that's why I chose this shot anyway. It's the difference between wanting to mow the lawn or wanting to have a mowed lawn. So the customer doesn't necessarily want to do the work themselves, but they want to achieve the end goal. So if we're thinking about what the customer wants is a mowed lawn, then there can be any different types of solutions. It can be, I don't know, maybe getting a subscription service for the summer months where someone's gonna come and do that work for you. Maybe it can be an automated lawnmower, or it can be a tricky game that you're gonna get your kids to play so that they do the work for you, which is very sneaky. So no matter what your view on child labor is, I think that last one would be the best solution. But anyway, that's just me. And getting back to the topic at hand, when we're talking about jobs as progress, when we're talking about that dream outcome, we have a lot of different options to sell people that idea and to create a message that really talks in a different way and resonates with people on a whole new level than what they've seen in the past. So think about the latter, the mowed lawn, rather than wanting to mow the lawn, is all I'm saying. So when it comes to jobs to be done, there's a few important concepts that we need to pay attention to. And the first one is how jobs to be done talks about the process of making a purchase from the user's point of view. First off, and very importantly, we're most interested in the process from the customer's point of view. So we're not looking at it from the more utilitarian elements of a customer journey, which might be interesting to user experience designers or to customer service reps or to sales teams, but we are really trying to be customer centric and see what that whole process looks like from the perspective of the user. So when it comes to the process, there's one super important element to grasp here, and I'm just going to stop at that, which is the idea of the first thought. What's the first thought? This is a step in the process that essentially makes the user start thinking about choosing a solution. They are going to start looking for different products. They're going to start comparing and contrasting. They're going to do their pricing research. They're going to do the purchase. But all of these steps that you see here below comes from the first thought. And this can be something that's very far removed from actually thinking about, hey, I want to buy a new bag. It can be, that first thought can be something like, hey, I'm going on a work trip next month and I don't want my teammates to see that old dingy suitcase I've been using for the last 5 months because I'm ashamed of the way it looks because it's been manhandled by different air companies all throughout this process. So this might be my first thought that's gonna come to the point of actually buying a new suitcase or a new backpack or something completely different. Because I'm not thinking at that moment of the first thought, I'm not thinking about a particular product I want to buy. I'm thinking about the deeper motivation behind what spurs me to get something new. So this is a very interesting point to master. And in jobs to be done, this is usually the moment you want to highlight in your product copy, in your landing page copy, to show people that you know what they feel and you know what they are going through. So the clearer you are on nailing that first thought and mirroring that back on the landing page for your customers, the more likely you are to get that impression of, wow, these guys really get me. They really know what we're talking about here and they really know how I feel. So this is the most important step in the process from the perspective of jobs to be done. And the other important concept in jobs to be done that we need to think about are the four forces of a switch, as they're called in research. So what are we talking about here? First off, what do I mean by a switch? This is any move that a customer makes from a current solution to a new solution. And we often try and think that we don't have any competition. And we often think that our product is much different than anything else. But from the point of view of a customer, they are currently solving their problem in a particular way, and that's their current solution of choice. It can even be just, I'm gonna, shut my eyes and try to think happy thoughts and pretend that this problem doesn't exist, and that would be my current solution. It can be as simple as that. It can be doing nothing. But still, you need to get the person from employing that current solution of choice to arriving at the new solution that you're giving them, that you're promoting to them. And this is the switch in the context of jobs to be done. And there are four major forces that are influencing that switch. So first off, there are ways for you to get people going in the right direction. So getting them to think more about that new solution that you want them to employ. And that can be highlighting problems with their current solution or just the attraction of that new solution. So highlighting what your product does differently, why it's better than anything else that they've seen out there. So here you're getting a bit in the direction of features, but still you're treating that information from the point of view of the user and that end goal that they're trying to reach. At the other hand, you need to be aware of the reasons they might decide to stay with their current solution. So this can be simply they already know what it is and they have the habit of using it, or it can be some form of like anxiety or uncertainty that they're experiencing. Getting down to those anxieties and uncertainties and explaining to people on your product page that these are non-issues is one of the best ways to get to a sale, to overcome those objections. And when you're doing jobs to be done research, you'll be focusing a lot on those anxieties and uncertainties, trying to understand what they are, in order to give people the impression that, yeah, if you're worried about that, don't be worried at all. That's not gonna be an issue for us. So one of the simplest examples I can give you is giving people clear information on delivery times if they might be anxious about getting a package on time to give to a loved one for a particular holiday or something like that. Or it can be adding that copy of like, we're not going to be storing your credit card details or something like that. If you know that people are generally not happy with leaving their credit card information on sites. This is, for example, where I'm coming from in Eastern Europe, that's a very common objection that people have. So if you do your research and you see that that's an issue, give that information right there on the landing page. So what's the research process to get to that nitty-gritty details that you're gonna employ in changing your messaging based on jobs to be done? So the first step here is setting the criteria for your research audience. So who are you targeting? Who will you be reaching out to for your research? Usually the best audience would be people who've bought from you within the last 3 to 6 months, and making sure that these are your best clients. So looking at information like people who've returned after their first purchase, or people who've bought at a bigger shopping cart value than your average, or people who've done a certain number of purchases with you, or something like that. So the reason we're starting off with our best customers is that if we know what they're interested in and what resonated with them, we can highlight that information in our copy, in our messaging, and show that to everyone else. And this means that we'll have a higher chance of converting new great customers in that way. So this is why I would first always start with surveying the best customers. If you're doing a particular type of research for a particular question you have in mind, for example, why are people churning out and not returning back to your site, then you can go after a different subgroup. But if it's your first series of jobs we done interviews, then you'll be going in the direction of best customers for sure. The second element here is contacting those people, usually in batches, and making it ridiculously easy for them to book an interview with you. Usually, the jobs to be done interviews take between 30 and 45 minutes. So it's hefty amount of time and dedication that you're asking people to give you. And you need to remove any potential barrier from that process for them to come and willingly give you that time and attention. Why am I saying contacting them in batches? Because usually if you go out and reach out to, let's say, 50 people, you get bookings for 5 or 10 interviews in the next few days. And then the less free slots in your calendars that remain, the less people will be willing to book a session. Also, you would want to have some time off between different interviews to change your approach, to move around some questions in your interview script and give people enough focus on the questions that really matter to you in that particular research. So when I'm reaching out to people, usually I would send them an email, and you don't need to try to read this. You'll find all the slides with the templates I use at a special link I've prepared for you guys. So no worries about that at the moment. But what you see in my email is that, first off, it's short-ish, short enough for people to go through. It has a lot of white space, so it makes it easy for people to read. It features a direct link to my Calendly calendar where they can book a time slot for the interview, so that we don't need to go into a huge back and forth of, hey, like, would this time slot work for you or not, etc., etc. And a nice addition to that would be to give them an incentive to come to the interview. Giving them a gift card or a free shipping code or anything like that would probably work for them. Frankly, what usually happens is that the people who come to those interviews already are very predisposed and very friendly to your brand. So that gift is just a nice additional gestures to increase your bookings, your interview bookings, but it's not necessarily like the bigger the better. It doesn't need to be like a $500 Amazon gift card or whatever it is. Usually I start off with asking for a 40-minute call, as you see in this example, because 40 minutes is a really nice slot because it feels very close to half an hour, which people would usually be inclined to book, but it's still longer than that. So they will probably not have a direct call or meeting right after your interview finishes. So if you're not done in those 40 minutes, you can ask them for a couple of more minutes of their time, and they'll usually say yes. Once you do 5 or 10 interviews, you'll be able to gauge what this perfect call duration is, and you can change your email invite. And the other thing you need to do at this point is prepare your interview script. I always go with an interview script because it helps me remember all the questions that I want to ask. You're obviously not going to follow that word for word. You're just going to change that and adapt to that during the interview while the person is talking. So whenever you see someone who needs a bit of a push to give you all the information you need, you ask some additional questions. If they're sharing everything that you need them to share, you're going to quickly move them to a new question once they're finished. But having that interview script and having it open by your side while you're doing the interview is going to help you focus on what the person is saying rather than thinking about like any potential questions you've missed. So this is a great crutch to use, and no matter how experienced you are with doing customers interviews, this is going to help you a ton. In the web page I have prepared for you today, you'll find a link to a default script that you can use for jobs to be done research. And you can obviously change that according to your needs, but it's going to give you the basics. So the next step is to actually do those calls. And what I'm going to suggest right off the bat is recording all of those sessions. Obviously, you're gonna let people know that you're recording them. I've frankly never had an issue, and I've done probably more than a few hundred of these now. Like maybe I'm getting close to 300. I've never had a person actually say, don't feel comfortable, please don't do a recording, because I usually just tell them that this is going to be for research purposes only. We're going to delete the recording once we're done with our research project, and it will not be going like live anywhere, or it won't be distributed within the company in any shape or form. The reason you want to record is that you can then go back to the transcript and get information from those interviews that you might have missed during the session. And it's also going to help you focus on what the person is saying rather than taking copious amounts of notes. The only notes I'm taking during an interview is a format that a colleague of mine once called Vassi's conspiracy theories, because the end result you'll see in the sec really looks like a madman scribbling down different like government surveillance issues or anything like that. But basically, the way I structured that note-taking sheet is according to those few steps in the process that I mentioned, from the first thought to the point of purchase and going back during the process. I would usually even start the interview from the point of purchase because it's the easier point for people to remember. Like it's simpler to ask like what was happening when you were doing that purchase on the website rather than when did you first think about it. So we start from the purchase point and gradually go our way back all the way to the first thought to uncover that. So the way this develops in time is pretty crazy. So this is what I meant under like Vassi's conspiracy theories. This is actually like a real life example of a sheet of paper I used during an interview. And what you see here is that I'm just putting down notes in the timeline and adding some important information here and there that's going to direct my questions down the line. And it also helps me understand if I'm missing part of the bigger picture. So for example, if I asked them about the purchase and I went back to the moment they were actively looking for a solution, I know that I'm still not clear on what happened before that and what was that first thought. So this is a handy way of taking notes and really making those notes work for you, because they're gonna show you what you still need to uncover down the line. And if this seems messy and difficult to follow, it is for you now, but if those were your own notes, you would completely know what's there. So if you're confused now, that completely makes sense, but it won't be an issue when you're doing your interviews. So a few do's and don'ts when it comes to interviews that I quickly want to run through. So the first important thing is to still value their time. So when I'm starting a session, I'm always asking if they have a hard stop at the end of our allotted time, if it will be an issue if I go a few minutes over, or if there's anything else that's stopping them from really like dedicating time to the interview now. But at the same time, I'm not interrupting them while they're talking or trying to rush them to get through the questions quicker. It is better to focus on a few important elements and limit the questions you're going to ask if you see that they need more time to explain to you the whole situation that they went through when doing the purchase, rather than to try to fire away all of the questions you have on your list just to make sure you've gone through all of them. So if you're stranded for time, focus on the important elements and kill everything else. Or even ask them for a follow-up. That usually would work as well for most people too. The next element is to get them into a remembering mode. So all the time during a jobs to be done interview, you're asking them what they did or how they felt or what were they thinking at that point. You're not asking them, why did you do this or why did you choose that? Asking why gets people into almost like a defensive position. You're gonna get them to explain something that might not have even been like a conscious decision at the point of time when they did make that choice. So rather than asking why and getting like a vague explanation of their reasoning, just ask them about what they did, and they will come to telling you why they did it, even if you don't ask the question directly, but it will be more high fidelity information, let's say. Another point is to leave long, uncomfortable pauses during the interview. What I mean by that is when the person finishes off their train of thought, give it a few seconds. Don't immediately go into the next question. What that gives them is an opportunity to think if they've missed anything, because people naturally avoid pauses in a conversation. So they might remember something just because it feels uncomfortable for them to sit in silence. So you can leave those few seconds. Obviously, don't be like creepy or awkward about it, but just give it 2 or 3 seconds before rushing to the next question. You might uncover some very interesting nuggets along the way. And another point here is not to use either or questions. Oftentimes, I get super surprised by the answers I get from people because they might give me a reason they did something that didn't even occur to me at the start. So if I ask them, did you do this, when you did this, was it, did you do this before that or that? And they might be like, if you give them an either or, they're gonna say one or the other. But if you say, so what did you do before you hit purchase, let's say, they can answer that question in their own way, and they might arrive at a solution that wasn't even in your frame of reference at the point. Give them time to tell you about feature suggestions, but don't go in depth on those, because this is research that's primarily focused on hearing out what customers think and what's their motivation behind doing a purchase, and getting that juicy voice of customer data that you can then use in your messaging, rather than going into feature suggestions or customer service suggestions and so on and so forth. And equally, don't get defensive and explain why your customer support policy works in a certain way or why there's a feature in your platform that works a certain way. This is product work that needs to go at a separate time, but the more you go into the details about how your product works or how your e-commerce store works, the more you're going away from that messaging and branding focus and more into the in-depth of features and uses. That's not why you set out to do the jobs to be done research at the start. So the last point here is to transcribe those interviews. Transcribing them gives you an easy way to glance through the information that you gathered rather than listen through the whole recording. And then what you will do is map out some key insights into your work file to get some patterns out of all the interviews you've done. You would usually start off with anywhere between 10 and 30 jobs to be done interviews to look for patterns. And the way I usually do this insight filing and coding looks something like that. So this is from a real life example from a customer I used to work with. So what we have here is, first off, we have the quote from the interview itself. So I'll just pull here some bits and pieces that make an impression to me while I'm listening through the interview. And then I'm gonna codify these based on a few different types of information I'm looking for. I'm looking for the jobs they're trying to do. So what are those end outcomes they're interested in achieving, that progress they're trying to go through? What are some of the pains or anxieties? Or what are some of the benefits they found that appealed to them when they were doing this initial research? So essentially, here we're going through the four forces that I mentioned earlier, and also the actual jobs, and then the hiring criteria, which is essentially what kind of elements were they looking for when they started looking for a solution at the first the first point in their research. So what were they trying to get? What were the solutions they were interested in, or the type of products they were looking for? So this is what the hiring criteria is. The next bit would be to code those quotes according to different themes that start coming up. So what I usually do is, once I'm done with a batch of 10 interviews, this is the point where I'll go back, look through the transcripts, take out all the quotes I'm interested in that resonate with me, and that I'm like, when I'm reading it, it sounds like, oh, that's something important, that's something I want to get back to. And what I do is, I do this coding only after I've gone through all of the 10 interviews and taken out the quotes, because at that point you're clear on some of the main topics that start appearing again and again during your research. So you arrive at anywhere between 10 and 30-ish different themes that you're coding for. And when you do this initial coding, at the end, you might come back and say, oh, actually, these two groups of information seem similar. So I might group, let's say, the pain, like a lot of people talk about the pain of weight loss, and a lot of people talk about fear of doing exercises wrong. I might group those two together under, I don't know, like limited information or something like that. In any case, when you arrive at the list, you have a good idea of what those different topics that come up again and again are. And the last, like, really simple element here is, I have a separate column for every interview I've done, and I just put a one next to the interview where this actual quote came from, so that I can get back to that interview. Or, for example, if I've taken out a very short bit of a quote here, I can return to that interview and look at the transcript for what was the context in which that phrase was said, if I need to look for additional information. And the end goal is going to be something that looks like that. So it's a short list of the different themes that came from my coding, and the number of times that each of those of these themes was mentioned by the people in their interview. A very important element that I want you to keep in mind here is that this is not statistically significant data. You see here that the numbers that a certain theme is going to come up is like anywhere between, like, let's say 50 at the most and 3 or 4 times at the least. But you still see a good distribution here. So although you can't say whether, like, the topic of conversion optimization or integration is more important to people, you can say that the topic of conversion optimization is slightly less important than ease of use for this particular type of users, let's say. So you still see here, when you see like an order of difference in 2 or 3 or 5 times, then you can make like, then you can say this is more important. But it's not necessarily, when you go down the list, that doesn't necessarily mean that an answer with 9, a theme with 9 quotes or a theme with 8 quotes are substantially different. So here's a quick example of what that looks like in real life. First off, an example from my own experience. I was working for a company that created a SaaS solution for event planners. So these were people who had to book flights for a number of different guests coming to international exhibits or sales events for big companies where they would need to get, let's say, 300 or 400 people in a different city in the US at a certain point of time. A lot of the solutions out there were using wording like making it easier to plan travel, spending less time on travel plans, etc., etc. So it was pretty standard feature-based or benefit-based wording out there. What we arrived at during the research were some elements that came up and that were very important to us. So one was the fact that virtually everyone was essentially using email and long spreadsheets to do their event planning. So they would send an email to everyone, hey guys, send us your travel information. They will then have to manually input them in an Excel spreadsheet. Then this Excel spreadsheet will have to be sent out to an event coordinator on the spot. They'll return it back with track changes or whatever. So it was super messy. And the only two elements that were common among everyone were email and spreadsheets. So you see here a couple of quotes that came up during interviews, and we felt that there was this big frustration about the whole thing. So we wanted to mirror that back to people and show them we really understand what you're going through and we're going to help you out with that. We're going to get that frustration out of it. So what we arrived at was this copy that you see here. I've marked off the name of the brand because they're not using that at this point in time. But what we wanted to have was something along these lines. We were promised flying cars. Instead, we still plan travel with email and spreadsheets. So even in this day and age, this is the only solution that we have on our hands. And we're actually like the travel concierge that's gonna take you out of that loop of old, outdated solutions that you see out there. So this was the main of the four forces that we wanted to focus on was getting people to really feel the attraction of the new solution based off on that issue they had, that deep issue and dissatisfaction they had with current solutions. And here's a simple example from a brand I like, and I see that they're doing a really good job at that. Thompson Tea are what they call sweat-proof on their shirts. So they often talk in their product information about all the different features of their shirts, but what comes up in their marketing again and again is the topic of confidence. And these are some reviews of users they used on social media just recently in the past couple of months. So they're talking about a whole new level of confidence that I achieved, or I can now confidently wear a color other than black. So they've done their research and they've seen that this confidence, this feeling of confidence is that outcome, that job to be done, that feeling of progress that people want to go to. And this is how they're using it to differentiate themselves from competitors, not just through the product itself, but by highlighting that confidence that they're giving their audience. So this is it with a couple of clear examples. I think you already see the benefits of that. And if you want to do the work, I have prepared a special landing page for you guys where you can get the details and the templates that I use. And there's also a link there to an article I wrote that goes into a lot more depth about jobs to be done research. And if you want to touch base, I'm available at any point in time on LinkedIn, over email, and I'll be happy to get to know you and hear more about your needs.
Vasi, that was an insanely valuable presentation. Thank you so much for putting this together for us. If you have a few minutes, we have still people watching. I would love to have a little bit of a conversation about all of this, because one thing I found to be really interesting were the interview do's and don'ts. And Jamil also pointed that out, that he really enjoyed those, because I think what many businesses neglect is doing things that don't scale on the first try. So having these one-to-one conversations, obviously, as you said, takes up a lot of time. Why do you think are they still so important? And what's that mindset shift that e-commerce business owners need to make time for those interviews?
Well, I think that's a great question. And the easiest answer to why you need to do this is simply because your competition probably isn't doing that at the moment. And you're going to have the upper hand if you already have that information, if you have spent time to really learn from your customers and understand even what's the language they use about your products. This can help a lot with all different elements of your e-commerce store, anywhere from the messaging of your ads, landing pages, or product copy, all the way down to shifting maybe your customer experience, maybe changing the way you handle certain customer service questions, or even adding additional information on your service pages like the checkout cart or the delivery information in the checkout that's going to impact your conversion rate significantly. So this type of research, it has very high bang for the buck, or bang for the minute, I guess, since we're investing mostly time in this whole process, because it can touch a lot of different elements from the whole different slew of e-commerce elements that we have in our day-to-day work.
Yeah, that's super insightful. I think especially the do what your competitors don't want to do will probably make the biggest difference in our marketing. I think that's a very valuable position to take. Do you have some final words for us on the BFCM Prepathon that we are hosting? How was this experience for you?
Oh, this was amazing. I get a huge kick out of doing live talks, and this is the best way for me to, share what I know with people. And if this has been valuable, then I've done my job, and I'll go out of here happy.
That's brilliant to hear. I think the audience is happy as well. And friends, don't forget, check the first comment that we have right below this video on Facebook and obviously on YouTube. You can find it in the description. You can win Amazon gift cards, one-on-one consultancies, free hosting credits with Cloudways, free tools, and a lot more. And stick with us, because we have more sessions coming up during this BFCM Prepathon. The next one is at 2:15 p.m. Eastern, Marketing Strategies that Maximize Your BFCM Revenue. With that, Vasi, thank you so much for being our guest today and for sharing so much knowledge with us.
Thank you too, and thanks to everyone for watching.